Hello, my name is Adam Winrich, 34-time Guinness World Record holder for whip cracking, and this is a video about my Bullwhip collection for 2024. For the last few years, my whip collecting has mainly been focused on getting Bullwhips from different makers. So this spread that I have right here represents 50 whips from 50 different makers. The whip that I've had here the longest has been about 18 years. So that's about 18 years of collecting. There are 12 different countries represented over 6 continents. There was one guy that I guess did research in Antarctica and told me he was going to go and build one of my instant Bullwhips down in Antarctica and send it back to me, but he never did. So if anyone out there knows anyone who can make me a whip in Antarctica, leave me a comment down in the comments section. Okay, so I'm just going to go through each whip, hold it up, say a little bit about the whip. Let's start out with, here's a couple whips that are most recently added to my collection. This Bullwhip is made by David Kashner, not a name too many people have heard of. He was a Hollywood whip maker, whip coach, whip artist, and stuntman for a number of years, at least from the 1940s to the 1960s. This is a Bullwhip that he made that supposedly appeared in the movie Nevada Smith with Steve McQueen. Bullwhip by David Kashner. Here's another Bullwhip new to my collection. Recently I bought the Western Stage Props collection. Both of these whips came out of that. Here's a 72 plat whip by Bernie Wojcicki by EM Whips. Some people really like Bernie's stuff, and it's harder to get considering he passed away several years ago. See what else we have here now. It's going to get kind of random. I'm just going to pull stuff off the piles. Here's a Bullwhip made by Chris King. If you've ever seen the Western Stage Props catalog, you would know this whip. Mark Allen had it custom made, including this horsehair hitching on the handle. See, what else do we have here? Here's an Argentinian Bullwhip. Now, when I set out these whips initially to make this video and to take a photo that you can see on my Instagram, there were only 48 makers, and I was like, I must have some other whips laying around here so I can bump it up to 50. So there are a couple whips here in the spread that I've thrown in just to bump it up to an even 50 different makers. So this one is from Argentina. I don't know who made it. Made out of rawhide. It's a Bullwhip from Japan, made by Reina Hayashi. I visited Reina in 2012, and then she sent me a few things after I got home, including this whip, and for that I say arigato. Bullwhip by Reina Hayashi. Yeah, there's gonna be more foreign language spoken with a strong American accent in this video. Here is a Bullwhip from South Africa, made from kudu leather by Vessel Cores. It also has a Rhodesian teak handle. Kudu leather is very tough, kind of similar to deer hide. Bullwhips from South Africa. Here's a whip made by Nick Schrader in Indiana. It's a 24 plat Bullwhip. Now Nick is mainly known for making nylon whips, but here is one of his rare 24 plat kangaroo leather Bullwhips. Here's a few more wood handle Bullwhips. This one is made by Drew Schrag of Missouri. Drew Schrag used to sell whips on eBay when he felt like making them, and they were highly sought after in the 2000s. By that I mean like from year 2000 to about 2008 or so. Here's a Bullwhip by Leonard Wheatley. Leonard was in California, made a lot of cowhide Bullwhips with wood handles for many performers, including Joyce Rice and Vince Bruce. This is a 7-foot, almost in new condition Bullwhip by Leonard Wheatley. Here's a couple very fancy high plat whips. This one here is made by Tony Nugent of Australia. It is a 36 strand, 12-foot Bullwhip meant to be a copy of the very fancy Henderson whip featured in David Morgan's book, Whips and Whip Making. This is probably one of the more expensive whips on the table, and definitely a very fancy whip. After Tony Nugent finished this one, he said, okay, I'm not gonna do any more 36 plat Bullwhips because it's like a lot of work. And that previous one was a copy of a Cecil Henderson whip. This here is an actual Cecil Henderson Bullwhip. Cecil Henderson made many whips for many performers. He's from Australia. He passed away in the early 60s. This is a 15-foot, 24 plat Bullwhip. Cecil Henderson is also known for making Bullwhips for famous silent movie era star Douglas Fairbanks. So Bullwhip by Cecil Henderson. Move to this part. Here's a Bullwhip from Spain, but made by a guy from the UK. Here is a bullwhip made by Alexander Jacob. I've got to meet Alexander Jacob a couple times, and the only person I know of to ever use the word homunculus in normal conversation. Here's a 12-foot bullwhip made by Fiona Wilkes. Fiona is one of the most influential ladies whip crackers in the world. She has won the Australian national titles many times over, and she makes a good whip. This is a 12-foot whip by Fiona Wilkes. Hang on. Here is a whip by Simon Martin, an 8-foot bullwhip. I have many stock whips by Simon Martin. Simon lives in Tasmania. Here's a Texas bullwhip. This is made by Benton Cassidy. Now, I made this video last year. There was one collector that saw the video, and then he asked me, how come you don't have whips from this guy, and this guy, and this guy? And one of those names he rattled off was Benton Cassidy. So some friends of mine, Will and Kevin Fitzpatrick, had one hanging on their wall down in Bandera, Texas. So when I saw him last fall, I was like, hey, can I buy that whip? And they were nice enough to give it to me. A bullwhip by Benton Cassidy. We have here. Here is a bullwhip made in Mexico. I don't know the name of the person who made this whip, but it's from a famous holster and saddlery company named Casa Zia in Juarez, Mexico. It was a popular place to buy quality leather goods if you were in El Paso. Unfortunately, it's no longer open, but a very nice example of a Mexican-made bullwhip from Casa Zia. And here's a bullwhip from Peru. This whip is made by Bernardo Del Carpio, a little bit fancier than the regular indie whip that he specializes in. This one is meant to be a reproduction of David Morgan's Performer bullwhip, which had 3 plaited bellies instead of 2, and also had a 16 plait overlay instead of just a 12 plait overlay. Bullwhip by Bernardo Del Carpio. Here's a bullwhip that I made several years ago. This is a 6-foot bullwhip that I used to set several Guinness World Records, or at least a couple, for most bullwhip cracks in a minute. It has a hollow graphite handle for some very fast cracking. Here's another bullwhip. This one is made in Australia by Peter Thorndike. Peter's made top quality whips for a number of years. I do have on order a fancier bullwhip from Peter to kind of raise the level of my collection. But right now, the only bullwhip I have from Peter is this 12 plait one. Cracks very nicely. Here's an American-made bullwhip made by Steve Townsend. I was kind of after sort of a Terry Jacka type, DeLongis type bullwhip, and so Steve decided to take on the challenge. Mainly, Steve Townsend is a good source for Indiana Jones style kangaroo leather bullwhips. Here is a Tornado bullwhip made in Australia by Cy Davey. It's a kangaroo leather bullwhip with a swivel handle. This is probably the best quality swivel handle bullwhip you can find just about anywhere. Unfortunately, Cy Davey does not export outside of Australia any longer. This bullwhip is made by Jim Hurlbutt. Jim gave me some whip making lessons back in 2003. I spent about 4 days with him. And then I've had a few whips from him, but before I was really focused on collecting, I just sold them off. So I'm very happy to have added a Jim Hurlbutt whip to my collection. Move these over here. Here's a bullwhip by Victor Tella. I do have a matched set of these 2 6-foot bullwhips by Victor Tella. He passed away a few years ago, and I was in the Phoenix area, so I was able to help his brother-in-law clean out his shop and his house, so I ended up with a bunch of whips and a bunch of kangaroo leather, but this pair of 6-foot bullwhips is all I decided to keep. Here is a bullwhip from Italy made by Giovanni Celeste. Well, I say Giovanni Celeste, but I actually got to meet Giovanni earlier this year when I went to Italy for a Guinness World Records television show, and it's actually pronounced Giovanni Celeste. I think I got that right. Also, when I was in Italy this year, I learned to say, "Hey, tu, porco, levale le mani di dosso." Bullwhip by Giovanni Celeste. This one comes from Thailand. Here is a bullwhip by Tirapong Nilapat. Tirapong is an art teacher in Thailand, and he makes a very nice whip, very affordable. Here's a bullwhip by Blake Bruning. I suppose I can stop saying here's a bullwhip. They are all bullwhips. This is a Zorro style whip that I had Blake made up, and I've used this whip a lot, especially good for strength training because it's a little bit heavier than the stock whips I normally use. Here's a bull whip. There, I said it again. Here's a whip by Torrance Fisher. You can see with the ring on it, you'll see some other whips with rings. There was a short period in my whip collecting where I bought several silver rings, sent them to different whip makers to have whips with rings made up. So this is one that I got from Torrance Fisher of Sword Guy Builds. I recommend Torrance a lot, especially for people that want nylon whips. This is an Australian bull whip made by Glenn Ward. I've also had some stock whips by Glenn, and Glenn has a special place to me, I suppose, because Glenn taught me how to do the globe knot on the butt end of a whip. If you see the knot in my nylon whip tutorial with Nick Schrader, that's a globe knot, and Glenn Ward is the one that explained to me how to do it. Here's a bull whip. There I go again. Here's a bull whip from Sweden. This one is made by Johnny Ögren. Johnny makes a very nice whip. His quality keeps improving year after year. And as Johnny always tells me, tänk på avståndet mellan vagen och plattform när du stiger av, which is Swedish for mind the gap. This is a Catwoman styled whip from the Halle Berry movie made by Casey Tyler from Nebraska. Here's a used Terry Jacka bull whip. This one was used by my father-in-law, Jose Granados. He performed as Don Juan, still performs as Don Juan at Renaissance festivals. He had used this one for a long time, so I fixed it up, and now it's part of my collection. Bull whip by Terry Jacka of Australia. And then this whip here is a copy of that Terry Jacka whip. This one is made in the United States by Richard Cottrill of Mallory Whip Co. Richard, also a good source for affordable kangaroo leather, Indiana Jones style bull whips. Getting kind of messy here in this pile. This one is made by Paul Nolan. This is sort of his American style bull whip. So Paul is the one that actually got me started whip collecting in the first place. Initially, when I was making whips, I thought, I'm not a whip collector, I'm a whip maker. I will make whatever whips that I need. And then when I met Paul, who is a whip maker, he had several whips from many whip makers that I was very envious of. And I realized then, oh, I'm a whip maker, I can also buy whips. So I can blame this addiction and problem that I have on Paul Nolan. Now, speaking of addiction, I was going to say, and bury this in the middle of the video, with this collection I'm presenting, I believe I do know enough about whips that this particular collection with this spread of makers could not be duplicated anywhere else in the world. There may be some other large whip collections out there. I know a few other collectors. David Morgan has a very large collection of whips, but this specific collection of different makers could not be duplicated anywhere. But if you are out there watching this video and you are close to duplicating it, we should probably be friends, because we obviously have a common bond in this problem we have collecting so many whips. Moving on, here is an Australian whip. This one is made by Glenn Denholm. Glenn carries on the tradition of making whips in the style of Tom Hill, and I really like how Glenn's whips roll out. Glenn's from Australia. Here is a 8-foot David Morgan bull whip. This one is in black. This is one of the first whips I collected, and probably the one that I've had the longest of any, about the one that I've had the longest almost of any on the table, and made in about 1994, I believe. This one is by Thea Reed of Mojave Outliers, one of the few women whip makers represented in the collection. And then this whip, when people see it, sometimes they confuse it for this maker right here. Here is a whip made by Peter Jack of New Zealand. Peter Jack has been making very high quality whips for a long time. This one is by Franco Zocali from Canada. It's a 16 plat 7-foot bull whip. Franco does an amazing job how he prepares the shellac to put the shiny finish on his whips. He does as good of a job as anybody in the world on making his whips with an immaculate finish. Franco Zocali from Canada is from Montreal, so I can say this whip has a certain je ne sais quoi. And some of these whips I did get through Mark Allen, so to quote Mark Allen, I know enough in about 8 languages to get slapped. Here are 2 more bull whips. So this one used to be owned by Alex Green. It was sent to a friend of his named Victor, who was a holster maker. And in the handwritten letter from Alex that came with this whip, it specifies that this bull whip was made by Sid Hill in Brisbane. And then we move on to this bull whip here. This bullwhip was owned by John Brady, a famous Australian performer, and John Brady, we know, bought a lot of whips from Tom Hill. So this is a 16-strand Tom Hill bullwhip, and Tom Hill was based in Sydney. If you put the two of these whips together, they are both the same length and so close to being identical. You would swear the same person made them, but I have to go with what Alex said, and that this one is by Sid Hill of Brisbane, and this one is by Tom Hill of Sydney. This one is by Spider. I don't know Spider's real name, but if you ever did Renaissance festivals in the 90s or 2000s and you bought a bullwhip, you probably had a Spider whip. I had Spider make these myself. He's also made them for other performers, including Don Juan and Miguel and Hack and Slash. The bullwhip made by Spider, probably an important part of this collection to me because I now make my living doing shows at Renaissance festivals. Here's another whip new to my collection, and it fits in well come after saying the Spider whip. This one is made by a guy named Viper. So we had Spider and now we have Viper. I don't know Viper's real name, but this was in a collection of a friend of mine named Steve Brockman, and he was selling off a few of them. I like this whip because it has very cool 32-strand patterns in the handle. Bull whip by Viper. Australian whip here by Russell Schultz. You can see this one has an engraved silver ring. Again, when I was going through my little phase of ordering a bunch of fancy whips from whip makers with silver rings. Russell's been making quality whips in Australia for a long time. Bull whip by Evan Fava, again with an engraved silver ring. Evan is an American whip maker, but he spent a lot of time making high quality whips and studying with Peter Thorndike, so really honing in on Peter Thorndike's style of whip making. This one here is made by Jack Perry. It is meant to be a reproduction of the bullwhip used in the Ten Commandments movie. I believe there's a scene sort of towards the beginning of the movie where you see a bullwhip that has a metal handle that looks like this. So what Jack would do is have this part turned out of solid aluminum, and then he'd have a hole drilled into the handle, a 3/8" hole, and then have a fiberglass rod bedded into that so you can build the whip on the fiberglass rod. Ten Commandments bullwhip made by Jack Perry. And I'm making this video now because some of these whips have already been spoken for and are going to other people. For instance, this Ten Commandments bullwhip is already going to go to Giovanni Celeste in Italy. So when I'm done making this video, then I can pack it up and ship it off to him. This whip is by one of the best whip makers in the United States today, a true artist. It's by Blake Gorey of Asheville, North Carolina. This particular whip is meant to be a reproduction of a Victor Tella design that I really enjoyed. You can see it has a single tone 16 flat thong, but then a two-tone 32-strand handle, and you can see the interlocking diamond patterns are actually replicas of designs that were in Victor Tella's design book that I got when I helped his brother-in-law clean out his shop. A bullwhip by Blake Gorey. Here is another Australian bullwhip. This one is made by Chris Barr. Chris is doing some good work these days. This has a 20-strand thong and a 40-strand rawhide handle. A very unique looking whip in my collection. It cracks really well. If you're looking for a good quality or excellent quality kangaroo bullwhip from Australia, look up Chris Barr. This one is by Joe Strain. Joe Strain is arguably one of the best whip makers in the world, and this is a 9-foot 24 plat Lone Star bullwhip. You can see some very cool patterns in the handle, made by Joe Strain. This one's by Peter Richardson of Australia. Not too many people know about Peter Richardson, but he does some excellent work. This particular whip, I'm trying to remember what it is. I think there's 22 strands in the thong and 44 strands in the handle. He does some very fine knot work and very fine pattern work in the handle. Very pretty whips. You don't see too many of them around with the other collectors. I found out about him through Instagram. The bullwhip from Australian whip maker Peter Richardson. And I think we're basically down to the end of the pile. This is a bullwhip that I recently acquired. It is made by Mike Murphy. Now, Mike Murphy retired back in 2013. So what makes this whip interesting is that It is unused, still wrapped, still tied up with the original ties and tag that Mike Murphy put on it when he finished making it before he shipped it to the United States. The collector that bought this one never used it, and I think that's pretty neat. So part of me feels like it should just stay in an unused state. It even has the tag Mike Murphy like writing on it, 12-foot 16 plat natural and red bullwhip. So a pretty neat bullwhip by Mike Murphy. Among certain circles, his work is very desirable. And then I wanted to finish off this video with a 51st bullwhip. You might be wondering which one of these is the most important. So this bullwhip is kind of the start of my collection. So naturally I started whip cracking because of Indiana Jones, and of course David Morgan made the whips for the first 3 Indiana Jones movies. So naturally any real whip collector who loves Indiana Jones wants to have a David Morgan bullwhip. So I ordered this one from David in 2005. I was able to call David, talk to him on the phone, talk about the whip. I even specified that I wanted a slightly smoother knot on the butt end of the whip, which he did. It's a very special whip to me in my collection, and of any of them, this would be the very last one that I would sell. A 10-foot bullwhip with a spider on it, made by David Morgan himself in 2005. Well, there we go, have it, my collection of 50 whips by 50 different makers. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. My name is Adam Winrich. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.